Hello and welcome to episode 20 of The Best Games Period. I'm your host, Jack Gardner. With me today, as always, are Jeremy Brown and Daniel Jones. And this week we are going to be talking about Ratchet and Clank. Insomniac Games, 2002. It's a pretty great platforming game. Is it one of the best games, period? Well, we're going to talk about it. We'll find out.
We'll find out what the committee says.
How are you guys doing?
I'm doing pretty well. It's been a busy week, as usual, again.
Yep.
Tomorrow's prom, so I don't have to work, but I have to deal with prom stuff.
Oh, yeah? Who'd you ask out?
What makes you think somebody didn't ask me out, Jack?
Touche.
No, my child is going to prom, so,
Yeah.
helping him with the tux and all those fun things.
Are you going to be a chaperone?
There's still that possibility. I am cooking dinner because he has a date and his best friend has a date and they're all kind of in the church. So since they're all freshmen, the parents decided this year, although I wasn't a part of that conversation, that that they didn't want them going out for dinner or driving themselves. So
they independently, without you, decided that you should just cook for everybody?
Yeah. Well, here's how it's happening,
right.
Which is slightly irritating to me because if I'm going to do it, I want to just do it. It's like the dreaded potluck. I hate potlucks, as I'm sure most people know. So there's 3 sets of parents and me. Total, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all bringing like side dishes and appetizers, and I'm supposed to make the main entree.
Yeah, it seems like something that someone should have maybe talked with you about first.
And I don't know what they're bringing for side dishes or appetizers, so to try to come up with a main entree that complements those is,
Yeah. A little bird told me that not only is prom happening in your life, but you just got your 8th consecutive.
Yeah, and I can actually talk about that because it's all public record.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, talk about it. Tell us. 8th consecutive what?
Inquiring
minds.
I work in a critical access hospital, nursing home, ER, clinic, small town hospital, and because we're all those different things, we get surveyed a lot. And when I say surveyed, it's basically, think of your county health inspector going to a restaurant and, looking over their stuff. Except it's usually times 10 or 20. Because it's, state, not just local.
Yeah.
So it's pretty intense. And also restaurants don't generally serve at-risk people like healthcare facilities do. So there's a lot more rules and regulations that you have to follow. And we get 3 of those every 2 years is on the average, because you have to get one annually for the nursing home part of it, mm-hmm. and then you get one every 3 years for the hospital part of it. It's not exactly a year apart. Like last year they came 3 months before the year was up. The time before that they came 3 months before the year was up. So that's how we've gotten to 8, I guess.
Okay.
In the last 5 years. And we have had 0 deficiencies each time, which is pretty impressive. To put that in perspective, any given facility on any given survey in the dietary, the kitchen department has a 92% deficiency rate, which sounds bad, but all that means is they had at least 1 deficiency that year. And it could be something as simple as obscure canned good in the back that was outdated that you were never going to use anyway, but you just never got around to throwing it away. I mean, it can be really silly stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've had 0 8 years running, so I'm pretty impressed and pretty proud of that.
Yeah, but it also means that you run a pretty tight ship up in that
Not
kitchen.
8 years, 8 surveys running, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm good at policy and I know the regulations inside and out. We do a good job every day so that we don't just panic when they show up and try to fix everything all at once, because you'll never be able to do that. I don't know if you guys know this or if the listeners have heard this, but my second day at this job in 2010 was a Tuesday. It was February 15th, I believe. And we had a state survey start that day.
No.
and we had like 28 deficiencies. It was crazy. You know,
Jeez.
I knew Monday that there was going to be a lot of work to do, but I didn't think it'd have to be done in one day. You know, I was hoping not. So, yeah. And I guess technically that's on my watch, but
you can't be held accountable for that.
Not really.
Not really your fault.
So that was the only one we've ever gotten any deficiencies on since I've been there.
Jeez. Good job.
Wow.
Everyone pat Jeremy on the back.
And now that everybody listens to that boring thing that they probably don't understand or think is that big of a deal, I get it. So how are you guys doing this week?
I've been dealing with potty training all week, so I don't know. People might not want to hear about that either.
You're almost 31?
Yeah, I should have known it by now.
I'm going to be 32,
32,
actually. So,
and you're just now getting around to potty training. Hey, you do.
I'm finally learning.
The first 30 years were on number 1. Now it's going to be on number 2. 32, right?
I'm going to miss these diapers, though.
And then about the time you get that down, you won't have any choice but to wear them again. So,
in fact, I'm pooping right now as we speak. No, my daughter's been potty training, and she's doing a really good job with it. However, she's decided that she's afraid to poop on the potty.
Okay.
She will pee on the potty pretty much probably 90% of the time that she has to pee. It's in the potty unless she's sleeping. So that's the only time she pretty much has accidents is when she's asleep, which is to be expected. And she just won't poop on the toilet.
Okay.
So she's I didn't know this was possible, but for a few days there, she hadn't pooped for like 4 days. So she had kind of forced herself not to.
What?
And yeah, she was afraid to. And so somehow she just forced herself not to poop and never let herself poop. So she ended up throwing up a bunch because anytime we would feed her, there was nowhere for it to go.
Her body was just rejecting food.
Yes.
Wow.
It was. So we talked to the doctor, and the doctor's like, it will work itself out. A lot of kids do that. More kids than you would expect. And we talked to daycare, and they're like, oh yeah, that happened to so-and-so. He was doing the same thing. Like, wow. Like, I didn't know that was humanly possible. Like, when I have to poop, I poop like 3 times a day. If I don't poop 3 times a day, there's a problem.
I'm just trying to imagine the amount of, like, the superhuman amount of self-control you would have to just not poop.
I don't know.
I mean, at a certain point,
I don't know how she did
the reactor goes critical, right?
Yeah,
that's what I would think.
And I think that happened, but luckily that happened at daycare. So she's been better since.
Oh, poor
But
daycare.
she's still not pooping on the potty. She's just pooping in her pull-up, which sucks, but she'll get there.
Yeah. How old is she now?
She's 2 and like 2 months.
Okay.
Yeah, see, that's not overly crazy.
No, it's not.
Yeah, she'll be fine.
But otherwise, she's doing really well with it. But I will say, potty training is exhausting. It's exhausting because you have to get up and bring them to the bathroom anytime they say that they need to go to the bathroom. And she says she has to go to potty just to stall for time sometimes. Like tonight, it was time to go to bed, and she's like, potty. And I was like, you just went potty 15 minutes ago. Potty. So we went and sat on the potty. And nothing happened, of course.
And then that happens a few times, and then the next time you're like, you're just saying that, and make her go to bed, and then she potties in the bed.
Yep.
Right.
That's the time that she really needed to go.
Yeah. Well, she'll be wearing a pull-up to bed for quite a while anyway, or a diaper anyway. But yeah, so that's what I've been dealing with. What about you, Jack? Well, wait. Also, I've been playing a lot of Salt and Sanctuary. I don't know if that surprises you guys.
Video games.
You don't say.
We talk about video games on this show.
Yeah. But Salt and Sanctuary, I am quite a ways into it. I counted 10 bosses. I'm on the 11th right now. trying to beat him.
Is this your new Rocket League?
There's 22 bosses. No, I'm only halfway through it, so it's like... But I am determined to finish this game.
Okay.
Whereas, like, Bloodborne, I got stuck at that part where
the hunters come out.
The bell ringers just keep ringing the bells and reviving guys. And I just couldn't get past all of those people, so I just stopped trying. But this game, like, I am determined to beat Salt and Sanctuary. It's not my new Rocket League. It's just the only game I'm playing right now.
As for me, I've been just kind of, keeping my nose down. A lot of games came out the last few days, the last week or so, and I've been trying to get through them so I can write some reviews. The biggest one that I'm really excited to write about is Hyper Light Drifter.
Yeah, that looks cool.
Yeah, have you been playing it?
Yeah, it's really good. It's really good. It's one of the most visually appealing games I've played in a long time.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
They even go to the lengths of like creating like full pixel art cutscenes of this just really cool neon colored landscape. It's very alien and interesting to look at. Pretty much.
Yeah, I want to play it.
It's one of those games where any screenshot you take of it just looks like something you could put up on a wall somewhere. Yeah. It's really great.
It looks really difficult, though.
Is it challenging? Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
It is and it isn't at the same time. Like, the combat is just very satisfying and fast.
Okay.
But it's not hard. The game is pretty generous with where you're hitting with your sword and also what you hit with your bullets. And so it's not really hard. And if you do die, it just starts you over. The autosave is really great. Just starts you over in whatever room you entered. So you don't lose a lot of progress if you die.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. And it's also pretty it scales up pretty well with like health packs and stuff like that. And it's really good at just hiding little secrets around so that you feel like you're really clever for finding them. Even if they weren't really hidden all that well, you just feel good about yourself.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
I like secrets. I like hidden things in video games.
Yeah, there are a ton of hidden things. So I've been playing a lot of that. I played the first episode of the Minecraft Telltale game.
Oh, okay.
How's
that?
It's okay. It's probably the first one of the Telltale's games that hasn't really grabbed me very well. But I think that's largely because it's intended for a younger audience.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of intended for kids.
So I finished the first episode, and I'm kind of on the fence as to whether I didn't like it because it wasn't very good, or if it's just not. I'm just not the intended audience. Because I get the feeling It's more for like 8, 9, 10-year-olds who are super into Minecraft.
Yeah, but really, does that shouldn't something that appeals to kids also have some appeal that adults can at least appreciate?
Yeah, but I mean, it goes...
Or is that not necessary?
It's not like the Tales from the Borderlands games, where even if you haven't played a Borderlands game, they're still good. The humor and world just relies so much on having an understanding of Minecraft.
Right.
And if you don't have that, I feel like you'd be just really lost. And if you're kind of on the older end of the spectrum, I don't know, I feel like there are better Telltale games out there.
Have either of you played The Michonne?
I haven't. I'm waiting for the third episode to come out.
Yeah, I downloaded the second one, but I haven't played it yet.
How was the first one?
I thought it was awesome.
Okay, cool.
I would say it was one of the best first episodes of the Telltale game I've played.
Wow.
Nice.
Cool.
I'm waiting for them to do a Rocket League game.
I wouldn't put it past them.
That would actually... You know what? I'd be okay with that. Just like the story of these people who drive Rocket League cars. Behind the scenes of the seedy underbelly of Rocket League.
Behind the wheels and then like the promoters maybe or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
You play as Chet Rocket, up and coming Rocket League star, who's also a bookie. Does he take the fall, or does he stay true and win his way to the top? Does he
take the fall, or does he score the ball?
It's up to you to decide.
This is it.
Yep.
We figured it out.
Telltale Rocket League. Telltale. get at us. We can do this.
Watch it happen, and we'll feel
have
like
your
idiots.
people call our people.
But yeah, so that's where we're at. And I think this podcast, we were supposed to talk about something called Ratchet and Clank. I don't.
What's that? That sounds vaguely like Rocket League. Is that what we're talking about?
It does include racing, so probably.
It does.
Yeah, there's hoverboard racing.
So we're talking about the original Ratchet and Clank.
Right.
From 2002 on PlayStation 2.
The reboot is coming out soon. I don't remember who's developing that one, though.
That's Insomniac still developing.
Is it?
Yeah.
I don't believe they're producing the movie.
No, they're involved, but no.
The game based on a movie based on a game. I like that tagline. Yep. I think that's funny.
In my defense, the series has been developed by a number of different outside developers, like High Impact Games, Sanzaru Games, Nihilistic Software, Idle Minds, and Mass Media.
It hasn't always been Insomniac?
Insomniac, I think, has, in most of them, been involved at least a little bit.
Huh.
Yeah, I think the last one that they were fully involved in was that first one on PS3, wasn't it?
Well,
Maybe not.
There's a trilogy on PS3.
They
Future
do all those? Okay.
I think they did all three of them, but they might have outsourced some of the work on those.
What's the third one? There's a Crack in Time, there's Future. What's the third one?
There's the Future
Quest
series,
for Booty.
There's Tools of Destruction, Quest for Booty,
yeah.
and a Crack in Time, and then Into the Nexus.
Yeah, Into the Nexus was the latest.
Oh yeah. That was that wasn't really traditional Ratchet and Clank though.
Right. I feel like this conversation is going to be very. It's going to be a little bit all over the place. I almost feel like we should have done Ratchet and Clank versus Jak and Daxter, because the two are very closely related. I feel like we're going to talk a lot about both.
There's a little bit of controversy related to those games as well.
I mean, we could totally do that. We can call an audible and do a Ratchet and Jak, because I could talk for days about Jak and Daxter and how Naughty Dog just screwed that series right up.
I say no audible because I've only played the Daxter PSP game. I haven't played any of the other ones.
Yeah, let's revisit Jak and Daxter at a later time and just touch on Jak as much or as little as we have to.
Sure.
Because, I mean, we do have to talk a little bit about it because Naughty Dog and Insomniac worked kind of closely together to make Ratchet and Clank happen. I feel like that's fair to say.
They shared a lot of assets.
But then Ted Price eventually came out and said that wasn't quite the way it was. So
well, they acted very buddy in when they were working on this first one. And I feel like he came out and said, "Well, how about what was the controversy, Jeremy?"
So, from my understanding, Naughty Dog offered to let them use a lot of their engine mechanics to build this game, and they agreed, and in return, the things they improved upon and whatnot, Naughty Dog was supposed to be able to use after the fact. By most accounts, early on, that's what we thought had happened, but then Ted Price, a few years later, in an interview, said that, they built their own tech and used their own tech. And while Naughty Dog did offer to help and did help a little bit, it wasn't like they used Naughty Dog's engine.
Well, yeah, so Ted Price did say those things, but I think the true story is kind of underneath that, is that Naughty Dog lent them kind of the basic engine that would allow them to do more with Ratchet and Clank and optimize it maybe a little bit better for the PlayStation 2, and they built their own tech on top of that and, expanded that engine. I think coming out later and saying that, oh no, we make our own stuff was just, I think at the time a lot of people were throwing some accusations at Insomniac that they don't make their own stuff. They're just ripping off Naughty Dog. And that statement was just kind of to combat that impression.
I would agree, yeah.
At the outset of this series, I think they were looking for ways to expand on what they'd built up in the Spyro the Dragon series. And, playing Ratchet and Clank today, you can see a lot of Spyro in this game.
For sure.
But the technology is way beyond Spyro.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't mean that Insomniac didn't develop it, but I think you're right. I think they they probably, I mean, even if they just did it to save time, they borrowed a lot of the structure and assets from Naughty Dog, but I think they definitely put a lot of their own stuff in there. Just the Ratchet, but you can see similarities in the animations. I mean, Jak and Daxter's not really known for it as much as Ratchet and Clank was, but both of those games have very cartoonish characters that look like an animated film, or at least did at the time.
I don't really see what the issue would be anyway. I mean, look how many people use Unreal Engine, whatever, iteration, and...
I think at the time it was a bigger deal, though, because it wasn't common for people to share their engine between different development companies. Or if you did, you were expected to pay, like, a huge licensing fee. And this was a little bit more... like, oh yeah, we'll let you use your engine. Any improvements you make to it, just share with us.
Yeah, and that was basically the agreement as far as I had read. So yeah, so the game proper, you guys enjoy it, Daniel? I know you hate it. Jack?
It's good, but it hasn't aged well. This is another case where I think when we get to the end of the episode, we're probably going to be talking about importance to games as opposed to something that stands up well to the test of time. Because I played it specifically for the show, and it's good, but it hasn't aged well. And my personal opinion is that the highlight of the Ratchet and Clank series is Up Your Arsenal. I think that game...
The third one, yeah.
The third one on PlayStation 2. That game does everything that this game does, but way, way better. Like, I feel like the signature of the series is the weapons and upgrading the weapons and that gameplay. And this one has the weapons in it, has a large selection of gadgets and stuff you can use, but it's much more of a classic platformer than a third-person action game, which I feel in Up Your Arsenal is what the series kind of did best.
Yeah, I know we're trying to avoid like Jak and Daxter comparisons, but I just have to say this. The Ratchet and Clank series sort of evolved naturally.
Yes.
Like it started out as this like platformer with shooter elements and some light RPG elements, and like it was a weird structure. It was almost, and I can see what you're saying, like, it had these platforming elements, but then at the same time it had all this shooter gameplay that we really hadn't seen mixed into a 3D platformer before. Not quite like that.
Yeah, not like that.
And so it almost felt like a game that was still trying to figure out its identity, and by that third game especially, it had definitely figured that out. And I think Insomniac leaned into the action and the crazy guns, but then also just figured out that, like, in an action game, you need to provide a lot of different variety, a lot of different scenarios for the player to go through. It can't all just be about collecting things, and there's more humor, the writing's more confident. So by that time, they kind of just evolved the series naturally, whereas like Jak and Daxter, to me, just took a complete left turn for Jak 2, and then Jak 3, they kind of tried to find this middle ground that really didn't work at all. And I do not like Jak 2 or 3 one bit, but Jak and Daxter 1 is one of my favorite 3D platformers of all time.
Really?
And that's coming from a guy that really doesn't like the genre. So,
yeah. Well, and you bring up the genre. I might babble a little bit here. Ratchet and Clank, in terms of the platforming genre, I feel is a pretty important one because it came out at a time, and same with Jak and Daxter. They both came out at a time when platformers were not popular. They were definitely in the decline, and there was this weird period of time, kind of early PS1, N64 era, and into this early PlayStation 2 era where platformer developers didn't know what to do. And Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank together kind of helped serve as the blueprints for how to make a modern, at the time, platformer. Because everyone up until that point had been kind of looking at Super Mario 64 as kind of, that's what platformers are now. And both these games took that and did something totally different with it. And showed people that, oh, hey, platformers can be more than just what we've thought about them previously. They can be different and exciting things. They can have, these more in-depth storylines. They can have characters that are more than just a Mario type or a Spyro the Dragon type or a Rayman type. Visually appealing, but not necessarily characters in the strictest sense.
Right.
So I feel like they both came out at a very opportune time for platformers because, if I remember right, when Ratchet and Clank came out, people were just hopping onto Grand Theft Auto Vice City and realizing that open world action games were kind of like the future. That's kind of what people were going to get into. And FPS games, but I'm babbling now.
No, you're right. And that's why Jak 2 changed direction was after Grand Theft Auto 3 came out. They saw the popularity of open world and they saw that people wanted more mature games but they had this franchise on their hands that Jak and Daxter didn't move mountains sales wise, but it did pretty well. So you're right. It was such a weird transitional period for video games because we had gone from the most popular thing going was Mario, this cutesy thing, and then anything that was close to Mario was gold. Like, it was like you wanted to be like Mario if you were Sonic or Crash or Rayman or whatever. Even the Gex series sold well, and those games are trash. So
you know what? If our podcast was more popular and you said Gex was trash, I'm sure you would get hate mail on Twitter for that.
Yeah, there's a loyal Gex fan base.
As weird as that sounds.
But if you were anywhere near being like Mario, and you appealed to the wide audience of children that played video games, your game was probably going to have a modicum of success at least. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, with the PlayStation 2 and Xbox era, the big things on consoles now were Halo and Grand Theft Auto 3. So suddenly, the audience aged way beyond what a lot of developers were doing.
Right.
And that was another area where Ratchet and Clank already seemed ahead of the curve. I said curb instead of curve. I meant curve.
You don't want to be ahead of the curb. That usually means you've driven off the road.
Yes.
That, in Grand Theft Auto terms, that usually means that you're going to get curb stomped. Yeah. But they were already ahead of the curve because they had kind of shooter elements in that game, and they had some sort of double entendre jokes going in their writing and everything, and so it kind of walked that line pretty well, and I think that's part of why that was a more successful series, and they really hit the nail on the head as far as that concept. But I think you're right, the first game was more of just a proof of concept, and then the real potential was realized later on.
Yeah, it's interesting to bring that up because that was something I was going to bring up too, was that this game has a lot, even the first Ratchet and Clank, it's made to appeal to children, obviously, just visually, but there's also, like you said, it has an edge, and it's not like Sonic the Hedgehog trying to be cool, to kind of seem cool. It just is making a little bit of, outside of the age range jokes, like even the name like Going Commando, which is, the sequel, or Up Your Arsenal. There are jokes in those titles that obviously a younger person is not going to get.
Might not.
An adult is going to look at that and be like, "Oh, that's clever. I like that." And even on like the story level, if you play the first game and just pay attention to what's going on, there's some really dark, awful things happening in Ratchet and Clank.
I kind of think the story in that game is okay. I like it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. One of the opening levels is Ratchet is on this planet trying to fix his ship, and the planet is being demolished. There's an army of robots have invaded and are just systematically wiping out the population of this planet. Everyone who can't escape is stuck there. You even encounter like this janitor who just can't afford to get off the planet.
Yeah,
there's some pretty awful
plumber's
things.
Back.
What?
That always makes me laugh.
Oh, the plumber's crack.
He says, he sees that guy and he says the plumber's crack, and the guy's like, "What?" He's like, "I said the plumber's back." And then they see him later on this different planet, and Ratchet says, "Oh, the plumber's back," just like, and the guy's like, "Haha, real funny." And he's like, "What? Oh."
Darkness, edginess going on in the background that's never like explicitly stated, really, or like shown to be all that horrible. And there's a part of me that's kind of like, man, you're wiping out planets, and the most emotion this main protagonist of yours can muster is to make like a witty wisecrack. When there's a genocide happening behind him.
Yeah, it's like like Mass Effect, the serious stuff where the certain group is wiping out everything, and except they don't take it seriously at all. It's
yeah. What is the plot of this game, Jeremy? For people who don't know.
So this guy, what's his name? Drax.
Drek. Yes, Chairman Drek.
Chairman Drek, and he is of the Barg race.
Yes,
if I'm not mistaken.
The Blarg.
Blarg race. And he's kind of like this, smooth talking guy, and he, in many ways, reminds me of Donald Trump.
Yes, I actually had that thought too. It's awful. It's awful that you can make that connection between this character and our modern political climate.
So their home planet has become extremely polluted, and they need a new planet. So what he's doing is he's taking the best sections of all these other planets to build a new planet. And of course, when you take a section off, the planet's going to spin out of control and fly into the sun, because it's no longer got its proper orbit or gravitation or whatever.
Yeah.
He's doing it way out in the open, not caring what anybody thinks. And he does have this army of robots, and while these robots are being made, somehow there's this robot that...
It's like a machine malfunction or something.
Yeah, it's a malfunction. He's not quite right, and that ends up being Clank. And Clank sees a info vid early on in the game and realizes what Drek's real plan is, which is kind of weird because the plan's never really a secret anyway, but whatever. And he jumps in a ship, because he can fly any ship, and escapes, and a couple of the robots chase him down and shoot him down, and he ends up landing on the planet that Ratchet is on. Ratchet is fixing the ship, and he can't get it fixed. He needs a robot thruster, so he sees the crash, and he goes to investigate it, and he finds Clank, brings him back. Clank agrees to help him get the ship as long as Ratchet will help him find Captain Quark, because Clank thinks Captain Quark, the world's biggest superhero, galaxy's biggest superhero, can help stop Drek.
Yeah.
So that's the first part of the game, and they go to different places. And one of the funny things about the way this game progresses, at least to me, and other games do it too, but I guess when you just watch all the cutscenes back to back, you notice it more. It's really a rinse and repeat game. You just go to a different place, you meet somebody, they have something you need, but in order to get it, you got to do something for them, so you end up doing it. I mean, that's throughout the entire game. That's the way it happens. That's how you get a lot of your gadgets and whatnot. And you can buy quite a few at the Gadgetron stations as well.
The structure is very samey. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like 36 different weapons and gadgets that you use in the game, which is pretty impressive. And they're all pretty cool in their own way. Mm-hmm. Anyway, you go through a series of events until you finally end up meeting Captain Quark. And there's like obstacle courses, hoverboard racing, all kinds of just weird side quests that are thrown in there. Some of them are optional, some of them are mandatory. Like, you have to win the hoverboard race championship. You get to Captain Quark and eventually find out that he's trapping you and gonna have you killed by a Blarg Snagglebeast or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Because he's in cahoots with Drek because he is the lucratively paid spokesperson for Drek.
Right.
So, and Quark throughout the series is just this crazy, weird character. I mean, he's awesome, but,
yeah,
you know.
So, sometimes he's your ally, sometimes he's your enemy.
Yeah, he's all over the place.
Yeah.
So you end up having you end up defeating the monster and you get out of that area. And then Drek just starts sending more and more people to eliminate you. And of course you get the gadget you need or the weapon you need that'll help you get past that area and kind of like Zelda, I guess. But you can't go to those areas ahead of time. I mean, it's structured. You can only go to them when it's time. I think the writing is actually pretty witty. I think the jokes are pretty good. And I think the story is pretty good. In the end, you end up facing off, against the bad guy, and you find out that his true plan isn't to just rebuild his planet. He polluted it on purpose, and it's really just a big real estate scheme for the most part.
Yeah.
So he's going to just keep polluting the planets and then taking parts of other planets and charging people a lot of money to move there so that they can live and just continue to do that. So ultimately
that sounds like something Donald Trump would do.
He's mass genocide of all these different types of, beings, aliens, whatever.
Uh-huh.
And,
yeah.
I
think that's also the plot of, like, Superman Returns, right?
It might be.
Lex Luthor, basically, his plan is to make a new continent out of Kryptonian technology.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing that's interesting about this plot is that there's a part where after Captain Quark double crosses him, Ratchet he doesn't even care about Drek anymore. He just wants to get revenge on Captain Quark.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because his entire race was wiped out. You would think he would have a little more...
You'd think he'd be much more empathetic towards these people who are having their planets blown up.
Yeah.
Well, that's another thing, is that it's an interesting pairing of characters between Ratchet and Clank, because from the get-go, Ratchet is not really that great of a hero.
No.
Like, Clank is the one who's very, he's innocent and wants to save everyone. And Clank is the one that's really on this mission to save, the galaxy. And Ratchet just kind of wants to do heroic stuff. So he meets Clank helps him fix his ship, and then he's just kind of like, okay, let's go stop these people who are blowing up planets. And Clank is like, no, we need to go about this, the right way and find the right people to help us.
Yeah.
Instead of just suicidally throwing ourselves into danger.
Yeah.
And Ratchet doesn't really care about saving people. He just wants to be seen as a hero.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like Captain Quark, except that...
So he's not all that different from Quark.
Right,
yeah.
except that
Quark.
Captain Quark screws him over, and so Ratchet, at least at this point in the series, instead of, I still need to save the galaxy, it's, I need to get revenge on Captain Quark. Later on in the series, it does a better job of making Ratchet be someone you want to root for.
But that might have been intentional. I mean...
Right.
Clank
Right.
Clank is kind of the altruistic, I would say... Not that Ratchet is immoral, but, Clank's got his priorities probably a little more structured and sound. And you see Ratchet kind of evolve towards that.
Yeah.
And as their friendship grows and their bond grows, and he realizes that he truly needs Clank, and he actually comes to care for Clank.
Yeah, and Clank is kind of his little moral center, keeping him on the right path throughout this first entry in the series. And, playing through it again, I really see kind of why they'd remake it. I don't know how much the remake is going to stick to the original game.
I was going to ask, does anybody know if it's going to be a straight-up remake, or is it going to be a spiritual remake, if there is such a thing?
From what I heard, they're going to change, like, the introduction of Ratchet quite a bit, because in the game, he's just kind of, he's there. No explanation, really.
Yeah, he's just working on a ship somewhere.
Yep.
Well, the remake is, narrated by Quark.
Okay.
Which the original wasn't.
Well, that also kind of brings maybe unreliable narrator.
Yeah, exactly.
How much is this game really the truth of what happened, if that's the case?
Apparently, he is. There's definitely a lot of that going on.
Okay.
So I think that might be where most of the changes come in.
Okay.
But I also think, just from what I've heard, I've watched a lot of previews and read a lot about that game, and it sounds like they've revised the characters a bit to be more like what we know them as now.
Okay.
So like you said, Ratchet is probably going to be more like the Ratchet you know. But also an interesting thing that I heard watching a video preview tonight, actually, was that the original voice actor for Ratchet and Clank only voiced Ratchet in that first game.
Yeah.
He didn't do any of the others, and I can't remember the voice actor's name that took over that's been doing it since, but he's going to be the one in the remake.
Okay.
Is going to be the one
pretty
that
obvious
normally does
it's different voice actors, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, I'm not going to lie, it was probably a good thing they shifted from whoever voiced him in the first one.
Yeah, he was better after that, I agree.
It was for the best.
But actually, they did specifically say in the preview tonight that they weren't happy. It wasn't intended for Ratchet to be kind of antagonistic and kind of a jerk in that first game. So that is something they're changing. I'm definitely looking forward to that remake, just as an aside. I played about half an hour of it at E3, and it's the best looking game I've ever played.
Yeah, I'm gonna play it.
Of everything at E3, I haven't played Uncharted 4. That would probably take the cake, but Ratchet and Clank remake is beautiful. The colors, the animation, the amount of detail in the environments, it's amazing to look at. So I'm pretty excited for that game. Personally, I'm probably going to decide between that and Dark Souls 3 on Tuesday, so we'll see what I decide.
Well, I don't think I'll be able to get either one on Tuesday, but I'll probably get Dark Souls 3 first when I do. But I'm definitely want to play the reboot.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about it. But mostly because it seems weird to me that they're remaking the first one. It feels very movie tie-in-ish. Mm-hmm. Like, I kind of wish they just did something different with it.
A little bit, yeah.
But you're right, it will be interesting to see what they do with it. Because especially playing through it for this show was I was kind of missing the weapon upgrade stuff and the ability that your weapons would, in the later entries, gain experience, and the more you use them, the better you would get with them. That was very satisfying.
That's going to be in the remake too.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I actually saw the Groovatron in the remake, so I think they'll bring in some of the weapons from the later games.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the weapons, can we?
Yeah, the weapons in these games, not specifically Ratchet and Clank 1, all of them really, are pretty unique and fun. I mean, you're not really shooting bullets, you're not killing things in the sense that you would in other shooters. It's just, they're fun. I mean, they're unique.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And I think that's part of the reason I'm not super into the first one, is because even though they're fun to use, some of the weapons aren't as creative as the ones you find in later entries in the series.
Oh, for sure.
Like, there is one that I really like, and that's the Glove of Doom, where you basically throw out a bunch of pellets that turn into little robots that go after enemies. That one's really fun in Ratchet and Clank, but I mean, how do you compete with, like, the Sheepinator that turns enemies into sheep, or the Groovatron that, shoots out a disco ball and makes everyone dance? They're just great. Like, I mean, what are your thoughts, Daniel?
Looking at that game now, it's actually really interesting how close it is to, and this might sound weird, but, the combat reminds me of a
Childhood
third person
memory?
No. Yes, that's what yes. Like a third person 3D dual stick shooter type thing.
Okay.
It works a lot on a lot of the same concepts that even like you go back to Doom used. You have different enemies, and each enemy has a weakness or a strength, and however you decide to dispatch that enemy determines what level of success you're going to have in just moving around the battlefields, moving around the areas where you're playing while also managing your weaponry. And because they give you so many different wild, wacky weapons and guns to use, that just adds a whole other wrinkle to that combat. And I think that's probably the biggest innovation. Some people might think that the story and the way it's kind of an animated cartoon is the biggest innovation that game really brought to the table. But for me, it was the inventive weaponry and mixing that with like a platformer style. I think that was really interesting. That was an important step.
Yeah, and I think they realize that too, because that's the part of the game that they make stronger and stronger in subsequent entries in the series, and that's really, I think, where it shines in providing this wide array of weaponry that both is fun and inventive, but also it feels good to use. Like if you just look at it almost like a third-person shooter, which is kind of what it became by Up Your Arsenal, right. It's really good. The first game is very much more of a platformer, and those platforming elements still exist in Up Your Arsenal, 2 games later. But I think the weaponry is what, if you're comparing this to Jak and Daxter, like just as a series, I think the way that they refined on the weapon elements and just kind of made that the focus of their series is really what ends up setting it apart from Jak and Daxter, which is kind of all over the place by the time you get to Jak 3, both tonally and gameplay-wise. Right. Yep. And so I think that focusing on making it a better third-person action shooter really benefited them in the end. Now, I don't know what happened in the feature trilogy that came out during the PS3 era. I kind of stopped playing them after the PS2 era. So I feel like we're kind of closing in on how we all feel about the series. Yeah. Being, qualifying it as one of the best games, period.
Now, here's the thing, though. I think we're specifically talking about the first game.
Yes.
Correct.
And so I think there's an important distinction that we need to figure out is this game good enough? Are the innovations that it made strong enough to make it one of the best games, period, even if it's not necessarily the best game on its own?
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's like, the other example I can think of is Assassin's Creed. The first Assassin's Creed had a lot of potential and was
not that
was
great.
An interesting game. No, but it was realized with the second game and the third game, Brotherhood.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't necessarily put the first Assassin's Creed in the pantheon of best games, period.
Or would we? We'll decide on a future episode.
I guess we'll find out. But would you put Ratchet and Clank, even though the sequels are much stronger? So, I mean, what do you think, Jack?
So, here's something I want to bring up. When Ratchet and Clank came out, it was a very well-received game. It got praise from everywhere. Pretty much every place thought that it was at the very least a good game, if not a great game. And like you had GameSpot saying that it's a fantastic platformer in every way and qualifies as one of the best games the genre has seen since consoles went polygonal.
And that's Jeff Gerstmann. That's not,
yeah.
That's...
Yeah, that's, GameSpot before he left.
Yeah.
And you have Game Informer saying the detail that went into the worlds and fluidity of the character movements are towering achievements that have no rival. They said that in 2002. At the same time, I don't think it's unfair to compare it to later games in the series, but at the same time, IGN voted this as one of the top 25 PlayStation 2 games. I think it was, I think it was in the top 20. I want to say 18, but I don't remember for sure. But that went not to Ratchet and Clank, it went to Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal. And, if you look at what these same places said about Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal, Game Informer gave that game 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10.
And this is what they said about that one. This is just 2 years later, right? After a long and successful history, Insomniac Games has finally created its masterpiece, a tour de force that is the zenith of a trio of titles that I feel should be held up in action/platforming history, alongside the original Super Mario Bros. Trilogy on the NES.
Yeah.
It is definitely something that spawned, I think we talked about this in our last episode, but about iteration and improving on a concept. And it's definitely something that established a solid concept. And then the iteration that went on between Ratchet and Clank, then Ratchet and Clank Going Commando, and then Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal. They did a really good job of iterative game design there.
Yeah.
But I have to say, for all of that, I think that if you can only play one of them, if you can only play one of this trilogy of games, or one Ratchet and Clank game period, it should be Up Your Arsenal, not Ratchet and Clank. It's a good game, but I'm going to say no. I think it's a good to great game, but it's not necessarily one of the best games period. Okay. Up Your Arsenal is one of the best games period, though.
Okay.
That's what I'm going to... That's where my vote goes, actually.
Fair enough. I think that if this show were called the best series period, then this game would be included, and I think that we'd probably all agree that this is one of the best game series period.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But I'm kind of with Jack on this one, where I don't think that it's absolutely vital to play this game. Even though this game is important for the iteration and for the improvements in the series, I don't think it's vital to play this game to enjoy the series. And I don't really think that it's something... I think you could go back and play pretty much any Ratchet and Clank game and get that Ratchet and Clank experience. And I think all the Ratchet and Clank games after this have improved and been better. So I would say no, that the 2002 Ratchet and Clank original game is not one of the best games, period.
Well, reviews should be coming out for the remake the day this podcast comes out. So I would say wait for those reviews, see what people are saying for the remake, and maybe just play through it that way. That's my plan. Because I think you guys are right. I think this is not necessarily a game that I would want to go back and revisit. But Up Your Arsenal has always been a game that I've felt like I missed out on.
Me too.
And never really felt the need to go back and play the first Ratchet and Clank. And just because it did make those innovations does not necessarily mean that it is one of the best games, period. It's it laid the foundation, but it was later improved upon in basically every way, like you said, Jack. So I would... I'm on the fence, but I'd have to agree with you guys that this is not one of the absolute best games, period.
So I'm just gonna ask this out of curiosity, but
yeah,
we voted no on this game, but we voted yes on Demon's Souls for almost exactly the same reason.
I have an answer for that.
Okay.
Ratchet and Clank type of games would have been made and could have been made regardless. Whereas without Demon's Souls, I don't know that Dark Souls could have ever existed.
Yeah.
At least in the same sense that it has. And to me, that's the difference. We kind of talked about it earlier. This game, the Jak and Daxter games, they were doing new things in platforming games at that time, 3D platforming games. And it wasn't like it was an unheard of genre. I mean, people were trying it, people were doing it, where Demon Souls was unlike nothing we'd never seen, and that spawned the innovation and whatnot that created Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, and now Dark Souls 3. So to me, that's the difference.
So, like, if I'm getting this right, you're saying that even if we didn't have, if Ratchet and Clank didn't exist, we'd still have Jak and Daxter. We'd still have other games similar.
Or I think something that maybe would have taken its place. You know,
right.
I think it could have, and that I'm not calling it generic by any stretch, but it wasn't groundbreaking. It didn't break into this entirely new genre that we'd never seen before, where Demon Souls had.
Yeah. Okay.
As good as that series ended up being, I don't think that it's really had as wide of an appeal as Demon Souls ended up having, and Demon Souls offshoots. And I don't think that, like, the impact has really been quite as strong outside of a few games here and there. So that's why I think Demon Souls deserves a spot where Ratchet and Clank.
And, you know, just a reminder, we're not calling it a terrible game by any stretch.
No.
Right. You know?
No game that we talk about on here is a terrible game, except for Metal Gear Solid 4. So,
well, and I think maybe one of the key differences that we talked about in the previous episode was Demon Souls was a game that everyone might not have played it, but developers definitely played it and took cues from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Whereas, you know, the first Ratchet and Clank probably didn't have that big of a, you know, behind-the-scenes impact.
I mean, especially at that time.
Right.
There were a few games that you could say had huge impacts on developers at that time. You know, we've talked about one of them, Eco. I want to talk about Devil May Cry. I think that did, and also, of course, Grand Theft Auto 3. Like, but those were the games that really had a big impact on development at that time, and Halo also, whereas Ratchet and Clank was more sort of isolated, and with platformers and, more importantly, like, games skewed to a younger audience, they just weren't as ubiquitous as they had been. So Ratchet and Clank's influence was sort of more isolated. Although, that being said, I think you can see Ratchet and Clank's influence in certain games. The Traveler's Tales Lego games come to mind.
But
for example.
But do you think that influence comes specifically from the first Ratchet and Clank, or do you think that comes from, you know, the impact of the series as a whole, or later entries in the series?
I mean, I think that impact comes from the first one because it laid that foundation. But I don't think that impact was nearly as widespread or as important as Demon Souls. So that's where the distinction is for me. So, in conclusion, Ratchet and Clank's a great game. It's just not quite on the level of one of the best games, period. But don't feel bad for Insomniac Games. They made Resistance 3, which we did determine is one of the best games, period.
Which, hey, their weaponry was somewhat influenced by the Ratchet series. I mean,
heck
those
yes,
crazy weapons.
This is true.
I had no input on that episode. Just want to say that. not saying one way or the other, just stating a fact.
Yeah,
we still would have outvoted you 2-1, so. But any more thoughts on Ratchet and Clank before we close this puppy out?
No, like I said, I'm looking forward to the movie, actually, and the...
Me too.
Game based on the movie, based on the game, so...
Yeah, Jeremy, the movie doesn't come out until after you leave.
The 29th, I know.
Boo.
It's unfortunate.
Boo.
Boo. Hiss. All right, Jack.
That's me.
Jeremy.
Present.
I just want to thank you both for joining me on this adventure tonight. And thank you, good listeners, for joining us for episode 20 of the Best Games Period. If you like the show, please let us know. Share the show with your friends. Tell everybody about it. We want more followers. We want more listeners. We want some reviews on iTunes. All that good jazz. Tell us how you feel about Ratchet and Clank. Tell us how you feel about the show in general on Twitter at bestgamesperiod. You can also find the show on SoundCloud, Libsyn, our hosting site, iTunes, Game Informer, and Extra Life every Monday when it goes up in audio form. As an aside, it's never a bad time to sign up for Extra Life to raise money and awareness for the Children's Miracle Network. Isn't that right, Jack?
Yeah.
You can also watch video versions of each of the episodes on YouTube when they get up the week of publishing, typically, unless Jack has some catastrophic problem with uploading the video or we get copyright struck by some greedy company. But personally, when the video versions do go up, it's my favorite way to watch it. We're getting a few more YouTube subscribers, so let people know if you enjoy watching the show that way. We'd love for you all to evangelize the Best Games Period, because we put a lot of work and effort into it, and we're very proud of it. Isn't that right?
That's true.
Well,
That's true.
Mostly Jack puts all the work into it, but I think we're all pretty proud of it.
Well, hey.
It's true. Jack puts most of the work in.
You guys showed up tonight. I know you're all really tired. You got a lot on your plate, so I appreciate you guys putting in the time, too.
I appreciate you too, Jack.
I appreciate all of you and the people who are listening.
So, while we appreciate everybody, come back next week for what will definitely be the greatest Best Games Period of all time. In fact, it will probably be number one on most top 100 lists. It's gonna be like the Citizen Kane of Best Games Period podcast episodes. We are going to discuss Ocarina of Time, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, the seminal classic from Nintendo. So don't miss episode 21 of the Best Games Period. Until then, see you Space Cowboys later.
You know what we should do? We should call it not one of the best games period.